When you say that it's so important that we succeed and that we win, what does success look like? I mean, is this like a path that you're on, or is there like an end goal? Like, what does success or winning look like?
It looks like President Bukele, right? Like, look, the guy doesn't put one foot wrong. Like every speech he makes, every "I told you so" he tweets. That's what winning looks like, right? Like everything we're doing is what winning looks like. So I think so far, like we have just been winning, 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 winning. And whether it's the homicide rate, we're now the safest in the Americas, right? Even the Spanish press is now wrote an article this past week where they were saying that El Salvador is a miracle, the Bukele miracle, right? That they were following on what Colombia had written in their La Semana, the most read magazine in the country just a few months ago, said it's a Bukele miracle, right?
Colombia said that?
Yeah, Colombia magazine in Colombia, the country.
Wow.
So they said on the cover, it said the Bukele miracle. And this is part and parcel. It's the same person. It's the same leader with the same, virtues, like fortitude, like patience, like all the things that President Bukele has that delivers not only Bitcoin, but also the security state, right? The peace and security that had long, been unable, nobody here had peace or safety for 40, 50 years because plunder was a way of life for a group of men in this society. So they plundered rather than protected. And I think that's, it totally makes sense that he would be a Bitcoiner and provide security, secure those blessings of liberty so that you would have the leader of the country who gave you Bitcoin legal tender would also protect life, liberty, and property. And that's what he's done. Those are classic Enlightenment ideals. That's what Bastiat said in the law when he said when plunder becomes a way of life for a group of men in society over the course of time, they create for themselves a legal system that authorizes it and a moral code that justifies it, or glorifies it. So yeah. That's what we had here, and that's what we no longer have. Like the legal code no longer authorizes it or justifies it or condones it, and the moral code definitely has changed radically, that we just want to be winners, that we don't want to be the losers that we were under that system of plunder. We want to be winners, and it feels good.
Yeah. For the listeners, she was quoting from The Law by Frederick Bastiat. Highly recommend reading the book. It's like an hour read. He was defining the term legal plunder, right? So they steal from you legally. They create the system. So go read that book. So winning is like not getting anything wrong and continuing to make progress both in life, liberty, and property, to the point that you made. What about like longer term? So like, there was a lot of FUD, if you will, coming out on El Salvador because of now the IMF isn't going to continue to give them loans, and are they going to be able to pay it back and things like that? So is some of the success being able to, like, say, build enough of an economy around tourism and industry that they're no longer, dependent on the IMF for handouts? I mean, is that a big piece of that, and how realistic is that?
Well, the success looks like proof of work, right? Proof of work delivers success, and we work and work and work. And one of the metrics of success that Max and I look at, and contrary to what the mainstream media, the Washington Post, the New York Times, the New Yorker, Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal have all written articles about El Salvador. And what they look at is they pick a metric that they decide is what matters, and that decides whether or not it's a success. And so they come here and they look to see if every single pupuseria is accepting Bitcoin. And therefore they say if they don't accept Bitcoin, just 20% they say accept Bitcoin, therefore adoption has not happened. Well, to me, what adoption matters is who around the world, the best and the brightest around the world, which of the best and the brightest are adopting El Salvador, not only as their home, their headquarters, but also like their spiritual home, like where they feel. Just like, in previous centuries, previous decades, people were spiritually connected to the United States and the notion of the republic that we stood for and the shining city on the hill. They really, they were spiritually connected to that. We meet people all the time that hadn't been to the U.S. but wanted to be in the U.S. They wanted to be citizens of the U.S. They wanted to move to the U.S. and work in the U.S. and build in the U.S. Well, that's the sort of adoption that we're looking for. So For example, when you look at Silicon Valley in the 90s, you didn't have Bloomberg and Wall Street Journal and Financial Times go there and go to every cafe and see if they were, if that cafe had Wi-Fi or an email address, to see whether or not the internet was catching on and whether or not they were adopting the internet. Well, no, what was really going on was the best and the brightest builders in the world of internet systems, of websites, of platforms, of the internet. They were there, right? And that's why it became the massive success that we believe will become. Like, that's what our future looks like for Bitcoin capital markets and the post-fiat world.
Yeah, I think the fiat money system and has just driven our society to a point where we're just instant gratification on everything. And so everybody just expects way too much too soon. And to your point, you wouldn't go to Silicon Valley and like, oh, it's been 3 years. How come everyone's not using it? The internet was around for 2 decades and we still had less than 10% of people that ever bought anything online 2 decades later. So things happen slowly. So you have to sort of look at like the signposts along the way, and you can see a lot of that. And it starts with creating that freedom culture and these strong property rights. And it has to start there. And it's going to take a long time for that to start gaining traction. And so you have to be happy with the progress, not just the end result of that. But does the end result, and maybe this is 3, 4, 5 decades, I mean, the end result would hopefully that it could sort of get off of this debt money system and stop being dependent on the economic hitman, if you will, of the IMF?
Yeah, well, we have a few things going in our favor here. First of all, you have what I call Bukelenomics, which we can
Is that different from Bidenomics? The opposite?
It's it's all about private property and economic freedom, but there's also a push toward expanding the public domain. So you see, for example, this new library that was opened in historic downtown San Salvador, that'll stand for 100 years, 150 years. That's going to be a long-standing institution that will outlive everybody around today. But that's a public good. That's public. The public domain is expanded. I remember back in the 1960s, America celebrating freedom of speech gave us the pushback against the Vietnam War. It also, the United States government put a man on the moon, right? That was a government project. Right. So that was a combination of the two. So here you have President Bukele, who's all about economic freedom and Bitcoin, but he's also expanding the public domain and doing so in a radically transparent manner, in a very cost-efficient way. And so I see these trends kind of continuing into the next 5 years of his presidency, and really just being that beacon of hope, that shining city on a hill. And you're going to just see a lot of folks mimicking that and emulating that and saying, if they can do it, why can't we? So it's just become this tremendous power of example that's changing people's minds.
In terms of changing people's minds, what we're also doing here under President Bukele is changing the perception of El Salvador in a way that guarantees long-term success. So when he opened the library, in his speech, he referred to, in terms of the public space being better than the private space. He referred to ancient Rome and ancient Greece. And if you think of Florence, like I always say, what we're building here is Renaissance 2.0, that this is Florence 2.0. And the reason why we know Medici is, yeah, he was a rich guy, right? But there were quite a few rich guys in the Italian city-states, right? There were some probably richer than Medici, but we don't remember them. Why don't we remember them? Because they didn't build a Renaissance, right? They weren't the ones. I mean, they obviously participated. They followed the Florin. They copied the Florin in Venice, and of course, Venice was then also quite associated with the Renaissance, but everybody remembers Florence because of what Medici did, what he left behind, like the David in the public square in Florence. Now, did Medici finance that with the hope of flipping it as an NFT, or was he hoping to flip it and gain more money, or was he thinking that 500, 600 years from then, people would still be going to Florence and marveling at this masterpiece. You know, what we're creating here, and Max often says it, is a masterpiece. And I think President Bukele is creating a masterpiece here.